Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a couple of mini Slimline cards using more Distress Oxide sprays because I've been obsessed with them. I'm also very lax in uploading videos lately. Insomnia. That's the main thing. Anywho, not getting into it. I started off with Canson XL watercolor paper and I had trimmed the couple of large scraps down to roughly, they're going to be bigger than my card base, so they're 3.5 by 6.5, something like that. And I sprayed them with water first. And then I am doing my bestest to not completely cover these with the sprays. I've mentioned this in many videos. I am very heavy-handed with all the things. You know, color saturation, all that stuff. So I was trying really hard to keep the backgrounds fairly light. I used Speckled Egg and Antique Linen Distress Oxide sprays. And then I pulled out Candied Apple, which you see here. With oxide sprays, it works best to shake them side to side, kind of like a bell. If you really need to shake them up, like I did with this one, because it's been sitting since I bought it, and I hadn't used it yet. And so the pigment was really settled. And either that reason, or if you're just in a hurry, like I always am, wrap either like a rag or a piece of paper towel, whatever, over the nozzle of the bottle before you start shaking it, because I showed how the paper towel had, it will leak when you shake them like that. So that just keeps messes from happening, especially when you're working with red. I've said this before too. Red is just a pigment that likes to get everywhere. So I was very light-handed with that. I just wanted that bit of red to kind of pick up because of the flowers, because I'm going to use that same oxide spray for the flowers. So I very lightly just kind of did a bit of splatter and then added a tiny bit more water and then let it completely dry. So these backgrounds have those oxide sprays. They're completely dry at this point. And then I'm going to use my still go-to favorite, the Spring BOHO Circle Stencil, and some Crackle paste. So I just place the stencil over these backgrounds, apply Crackle paste, and that's it. I'm not actually going to add anything else. Like, I'm not going to come back and add more sprays, things like that. I've done that with other cards in previous videos. It just depends on my mood. But I wanted the backgrounds to just kind of be sort of light and not, like I said, super intense and like 30,000 layers. So I set those aside to dry. And then my main focus is the Simon Says stamp. This is the Spring Bouquets stamp set. And it's fabulous. And I love it. It goes with so many of the other sets that had more like individual flowers and that, because there's a bunch of them that have been released. And I love these big, well, anything big floral. I say the same thing every time. If it's a big floral image, I'm going to love it. So, Canson XL watercolor paper again. This time I stamped the image with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. So I used my anti-static powder tool first, stamped the images. I did it twice because, as always, if I can do 2 cards at once, why not? And then I coated these with Wow's Clear Matte Dull embossing powder. I like using this. It just, again, it depends on my mood. You can use just regular clear embossing powder if you want. I like the Clear Matte Dull when I'm in the mood for it because it doesn't look embossed, but I still get those raised edges, which I really, really like, especially doing things like this. It keeps things contained so that I don't have color just going everywhere, especially, again, when working with red. So I've got them heat embossed, and then I'm just going to do very simple watercoloring, and I'm only using 2 colors. I'm using the Candied Apple Distress Oxide Spray and Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide Spray. And I'd shaken them up really well, and then I just applied drops of it to my little plastic palette, and then I wet the area that I'm coloring first with clean water, and then I just add the sprays. That's it. Super simple, super easy. You can kind of do whatever you want with this sort of a thing. It doesn't have to be the sprays. You could smush your oxide ink pads. You could smush distress inks. Any water reactive ink, watercolors would work too. Again, I've just been having an absolute blast playing with my oxide sprays. And anything in the distress line, whether it's the ink, the oxide ink, spray stain, etc. They're all so water reactive that it just is fun to do things like this because they just will take on a mind of their own. So again, I worked somewhat to not be super heavy-handed. Red can get difficult. Red can bleed very easily. Red can stain red does stain everything. Red is just one of those colors, but this was, well, technically, these cards were technically for the Color Throwdown Challenge 2 weeks ago. I'm just going to be honest that I was the hostess of, and I wasn't able to get this video up, nothing. Anyway, I saw I was working with red, which I don't do very often because I'm just not a big red person, but in the right application, it is perfect. And with these roses, of course, like red, just, oh. So anyway, I did keep it simple though with just those 2 colors. And Rustic Wilderness, love. It is the perfect shade of green. I did not think I would love it as much as I did, and I've said this as well many times. Every new distress color that gets released, I'm always like, it's my favorite. But this Rustic Wilderness green is just, it is such a beautiful shade of green. Like, and it's literally like rose leaf green, you know? So I used that on the leaves, same thing. Just painted clean water and then picked up the Oxide spray and painted it onto the petal or onto the leaves. I let everything dry, so it's completely dry, which didn't take very long. Once it was dry, I'm going to use the coordinating wafer die to die cut these. And this yellow tape is Spellbinder's tape. I had purchased it weeks ago. I've used it, I think, in a few videos. I'm quite enjoying it. It's very similar to washi tape, but just slightly more sticky, I would say. So I like it. It's been holding up really well. So anywho, I die cut those florals. My backgrounds, now that they're completely dry, I trim down to about 3x6 roughly. And then to adhere the florals to the backgrounds, I'm going to use Simon's Big Mama foam tape because it gives it that little bit of dimension without being super thick and bulky. And this stuff is super sticky. However, the liner comes off really well. Way back in the day when they first started carrying this tape, the liner was an absolute nightmare to remove. And I still loved it and still struggled with it and didn't care. But since I don't know when, it's been a while because I've gone through I don't know how many rolls of this tape. It comes off really easily, but I do recommend I use my little Tim Holtz snips with this foam tape and all other like foam and sticky adhesives and stuff like that because those snips are Teflon coated. So anywho, got the flowers onto the backgrounds, put them in my splat box because of course, got to add more splatter. So I'm using my Starry Colors palette, of course. This time I'm using just the champagne gold from the set. This one's a little more muted. I didn't want like super intense gold splatter. One was going with the color combo, but also I didn't want it to overwhelm everything else. So the champagne gold's really pretty. And again, my lighting was really off. Like it was all natural light, I think, this time when I filmed all of this. But my camera wasn't picking up any of the pretty shimmeriness. I kind of got it at the end, but not really. But anyway, got those completely splattered. Set those aside to dry. For the sentiment, I'm using one of the stamps from the same stamp set. And I'm just going to stamp the sentiment onto this scrap of white cardstock with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And I'm going to heat emboss it with that same embossing powder. Again, doesn't have to be the WOW Clear Matte Doll. You could just use regular clear embossing powder. But it definitely needs to be heat embossed so that it doesn't smear. Because I'm going to add ink on top of this. I didn't have a cardstock this shade of blue. I want this shade of blue in a cardstock so bad. So I just used Speckled Egg Distress ink. I applied it first directly from the ink pad to the cardstock. And then I used a blending brush because it's such a fine, detailed word. The ink pad doesn't get in between those little raised edges. So I just used a blending brush just to make sure to get in the little nooks and crannies. And then same thing, let that dry because especially when you're applying ink directly to cardstock like that, it takes a little longer to dry than when you're just stamping it, etc. And then I used my guillotine trimmer to trim these down. Had them trimmed and then decided to kind of trim the end on an angle just to give it a little extra something. And then just did a little bit of eyeballing here with the edge of the trimmer and the edge of the first sentiment just to kind of get them somewhat even. It never has to be perfect and it never has to be exact because it's 2 separate cards. But it makes it easier when I've got one to go by to just follow it for the second one. So while I had my trimmer out, I'm going to trim down my card bases, which is Nina Desert Storm cardstock, one of my favorites. And I have washi tape on the edge of my guillotine trimmer. The edge of the washi tape marks the 6 1/4 inch mark. And then I have a little black line that I drew with a Sharpie marker and a ruler that marks the 6 1/2 inch because the guillotine trimmer, it only goes up to 6 inches. And I need the markings so I can cut my bases for mini slimline cards, because I cut my bases to 6 1/4 inches by 6 1/2 inches. And then I score it at 3 1/4 inches. So my mini slimline cards are 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. People ask a lot, like, what's the standard size? Honestly, I don't know. 3 by 6 is kind of average. 3 1/2 by 6 1/2 might not fit in a lot of the mini slimline envelopes. So I just go with 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. It works. So anywho, bases I folded inside out. I lined them up inside my MISTI and then lined up that big floral image again. I've cleaned it off, and I'm going to stamp this with the Speckled Egg Distress Oxide ink. And again, on camera right now, it's going to look almost like nothing, but in real life, you can see it. Trust me. It's subtle, which is what I wanted. I didn't want, you know, super busy inside, but lined up the second card base and stamped it again with that same Speckled Egg Oxide ink. If the card bases were like white or ivory, you'd obviously see it a lot better. But I have something about the Desert Storm cardstock. I love it. And I love oxides on top of Desert Storm. Even the pale ones like this, there's just something about it. So anywho, did that. And then the sentiment is also from that set that I lined up. And then I'm just going to ink it up and stamp it with the Nocturne ink. And the sentiments I'm going to stamp a couple times, because you're stamping on top of the oxide ink. And sometimes, especially with sentiments, they don't stamp perfectly the first time around. So got those stamped. And then the card fronts, I adhered to the card bases with another layer of Big Mama foam tape, just to, again, give it that little bit of extra dimension. And I didn't bother cutting off any of the leaves. These cards will just fit inside the envelopes without me having to cut the leaves off. So I left them. But I've done it in other videos. I don't really mind, but this just happened to work that they just fit. But if it doesn't, I just flip it over, trim it off with scissors, and we're good to go. And then, of course, got to add a little bit of extra bling. So I've got my Studio Katia Vintage Shimmer Pearls, just ivory shimmery pearls. So I sprinkled those throughout these cards, and then I'm just adhering that into place with some craft tacky glue. And then once those are adhered, I'm going to pair these cards with some mini slimline ivory envelopes. And that's going to finish off these cards. So I will link in the description box below the video. I'll link to my blog post, because I'll post the pictures that I'll have at the end that you can check out. You can kind of see the shimmer from the splatter, kind of see the crackle from the embossed face. Again, I wanted the backgrounds to be subtle, but they got the shimmer and the splatter and the pearls, all that fun stuff. So I will have links to everything in the description box below the video. And then as well as on my blog, I have like picture links to make everything easier to navigate. That will also be linked directly below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very, very much appreciate it. And I hope to see you all very soon in another video. Bye.